Hi, good evening. I'd like to welcome you all here. My name is Michelle Kaminsky, and I'm a faculty member here in the School of Labor and Industrial Relations. I teach in the Labor Education Program. I want to welcome you on behalf of our school's new director, Bill Cook, and the head of our Labor Education Program, John Beck, who's in the back of the room. Most of you know that tonight's program is being broadcast to two other locations. I'm here in East Lansing at Michigan State University, and we also have some folks at Wayne State University, thanks to Hal Stack and Dave Dobby. And we have a group of folks up at Northern Michigan University also, thanks to Jack LaSalle and Shayna Alderton. And we want to thank you all for turning out. I know that, like many of you, this is the first time in a long time I feel really excited about an election that we've had in the United States. And I just want to ask you, how many of you knocked on doors, made phone calls, tried to convince your neighbors and or other folks, family members, to coworkers to vote for Barack Obama in this election? And I would like you all to give yourselves a hand for the great job that you all did. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to my colleague, John Rivette, who put most of this program together, and he's going to introduce the speakers and keep the panels running on time. John.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to John Beck and Bill Cook and the School of Labor and Industrial Relations. I want to make sure we thank Christy White, who's a member of the school's staff, who helped with a lot of the materials, and Deb Bennett, my secretary, who also did some help. I want to thank Jason and Doug here at MSU Communications, WKR, and their wonderful staff that are working there. And thanks to the people at Northern Wayne State and in Washington, D.C., who are also the technicians who are helping us out on that. I certainly want to thank all of the speakers, and I'm not going to be spending any of our time introducing the speakers. If you look in the handouts, you'll see right after the agenda there's a set of speakers' bios, and that should give you information on all of the speakers that will be here with us this evening. And I want to thank all of them and their staffs who helped make this possible. I want to quickly mention that there's a lot of materials here that Michelle and I and some others put together. We hope you find them interesting. If we forgot to get copyright approval, my apologies to whoever I should apologize for that. We have asked, and we will be tape recording this. So besides being careful with your questions in both in timing and content, but I also wanted to say, if you would like a copy, I think $15, $20, you can contact Michelle at some point in the future. So with that, I want to sort of thank everybody for joining us. This was, as Michelle said, a very interesting national, state, and local election. And we've pulled together a group of people who know a great deal about what happened. We have sort of three panels. We'll be taking a 10-minute break between panels 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. The first panel is about the national election results and the implications for unions and employment relations. Then there'll be a subsequent panel on the Michigan election results and then Michigan's next legislature. So the first panel is Paul Abramson, who's right here with me, an MSU political science professor. Bart Stupak, United States Congressman, who's in Washington, D.C. and up on the monitor. And Dick Long, the UAW camp director, should be in Detroit and joining us in a minute. So I think we'll go in the order that we have here. And Paul, if you go first.
Okay. Well, after the 2004 elections, there were many hyperbolic statements about the results, not only from partisans such as Karl Rove, but even from distinguished political scientists. But even well before the 2004 elections, many students of party politics claimed there had been a pro-Republican realignment. In fact, Ronald Reagan made precisely this claim after the 1984 elections. Since the 1980 elections, my major co-authors on elections, John Aldridge and David Rohde, both of whom are now at Duke University, have been writing books on the most recent presidential and midterm elections, and we have been discussing prospects for party realignments since our first book, which was published back in 1982. In fact, we've been quoting Reagan's claims for several decades. although we've never believed them. In fact, few pundits have claimed that the 2008 presidential and congressional victories have ushered in a new party realignment, although many argue that they may have smashed the potential for the Republicans to become the majority party. In fact, if one examines presidential election results since Eisenhower's election in 1952, the main conclusion I think that one would reach is there has been a great deal of volatility. There's only been one brief period in 1980, 84, and 88 in which the same party has won 3 presidential elections in a row. And there were 2 elections, 1976 and 1980, in which there was the consecutive defeat of 2 incumbent presidents, something that had happened only once before in U.S. history, and that was back in 1888 and 1892. Our main analysis of public opinion is based upon the National Election Studies Survey conducted by the Survey Research Center of the University of Michigan. But those data won't be available to analyze until next spring. But we can also glean some information from the so-called pool polls sponsored by the television networks and by the Associated Press. In addition to collecting questionnaires from voters as they left the polling stations in 2004, there was a supplement of 500 early voters with a telephone poll. There was so much early voting in 2008 that there was a supplement of nearly 2,400 absentee ballot and early voters. Now I'll focus, and I did send the basic results, which is part of your handout. And these are based upon the pool poll. And I'll focus first on social groups and just on the groups that traditionally made up the New Deal coalition. One major component of the New Deal coalition was Southern whites who used to vote overwhelmingly Democratic. But in 2004, according to this poll, only 29% of Southern whites voted for Kerry. In 2008, only 30% voted for Obama. In 2004 and 2008, a majority of whites voted Republican, with only a negligible shift away from the GOP in 2008. Now, blacks did vote very heavily for Kerry, 88% according to this poll, but 95% voted for Obama. So racial differences were higher in 2008 than back in 2004. Union members are also seen as a core component of the New Deal coalition. About 3 out of 5 voters living in a union household voted Democratic in both of the last 2 presidential elections. On the other hand, among voters who did not live in union households, support for the Democrats actually went up from 44% in 2004 to 51% this year. As a result, the differences between union members and non-union members decreased from some 15 points to 8 points. And Roman Catholics were also seen as a major component of the New Deal coalition. What's striking about 2004 is even though there was a Catholic candidate, he won only 43% of the vote among white Catholics. Back in 1960, Jack Kennedy won 80% of the vote from white Catholics. Obama did only slightly better than Kerry did among the white Catholic vote. As for groups that were not historically part of the New Deal coalition, we should note that a majority of white women voted Republican, and in both elections there was a relatively small gender gap, only 7 points in 2004 and only 5 points in 2008. Lastly, although there were relatively small age group differences in 2004, there were very substantial age differences in 2008. Nearly 2/3 of the voters between the ages of 18 and 29 voted for Obama, and among voters 65 and over, only 45% did. Regarding the second set of tables, labeled Table 3 and 4, I only have time to focus on one result, and that deals with presidential approval. In 2004, 90% of the voters who approved of Bush's performance as president voted for him, and not too surprisingly, he only received 6% among those who disapproved. In 2008, McCain did just as well as Bush had done among voters who approved of the incumbent president, George W. Bush. But he did much better than Bush among voters who disapproved of Bush. He won he won a little over 3 out of 10 of those votes. Now, there could be several explanations for this, but the most obvious is that McCain could distance himself from Bush, whereas obviously Bush could not very easily distance himself from Bush. But even although McCain did substantially better among those who disapproved of Bush, there was a huge shift in presidential approval. So back in 2004, a slight majority of voters approved of Bush's performance. In 2008, only 27% of the voters did. And if you make some assumptions that the distribution of approval in 2008 had been the same as the distribution of approval 4 years earlier, and further assume that McCain would have done as well among those who approved of Bush as he actually did do, and among as well as those who disapproved as Bush as he actually did do, then McCain's overall share of the vote would have risen from 45% to 61%, and he would have easily prevailed over Obama. Now, McCain obviously made many mistakes during the campaign, whereas Obama ran an outstanding general election campaign. But even if McCain had run a much better campaign, even if he had been a more attractive candidate, even if he had chosen a better vice presidential running mate, economic conditions, especially from mid-September on, would probably have destroyed the prospect for any Republican. Now, let me turn briefly to Congress. In the House, the Democrats, I think, appear to have gained 20 seats, although there are a couple of House seats still to be, contests still to be resolved. In the Senate, they have gained at least 7 seats. These gains, although not substantial, especially the Senate gains, of course not all the Democrats had hoped for, because toward the very end of the campaign, it appeared that a filibuster-proof Senate might be in reach, but those hopes died when Saxby was reelected. But in the short term, the Democrats do seem to be well positioned in both chambers for the 2010 midterm. As you know, House freshmen are often vulnerable